مرحبا مساء الخير.
Hello, good evening. I'm very sorry for the delay. We had a problem with our link. Good evening, Gihan. Good evening, everyone. We're happy to have you in this webinar on the major outcomes of COP27 negotiations on gender, youth, and future generations. So welcome to you all. We're happy to have you all here with us in this webinar. We will be talking about gender with Mrs. Gihan Abou Zeid. We will be introducing her later on. And Mrs. Dagdoug, she is a medical student at the Faculty of Medicine of the Monastir University in Tunisia. Welcome. As you know, the COP27 is almost reaches end, and there were many topics that were discussed, mainly the leaders summit, world leaders summit, and then followed by many specialized sessions that tackled issues like water, youth, women, discrimination, and many main topics affected by climate change at the moment. And later on. So we have to undertake a series of steps in order to solve this problem and to face climate change that's impacting everyone. At the onset, I would like to welcome Mrs. Gihan Abou Zeid. Mrs. Abou Zeid is a gender and human rights researcher and a political advisor for the Ministry of Family in Egypt, and a regional researcher that undertakes research on gender, and an expert in a number of international regional organizations. She is an author of several books, and she participated in authoring many books and scientific articles, and presented papers in a number of conferences and seminars. She is a member in a number of international regional organizations, including the Arab NGO Network for Development, ANND, and she is a founding member of the Women Empowering Network in Egypt. We're happy to have you with us, Mrs. Gihan, because you're an expert in gender issues, and we want to know or listen your opinion regarding negotiations that took place in COP27, and what were discussions on the role of women in the impact of climate change and other issues. Welcome, and also would like to welcome Miss Dagdoug from Tunisia, and she is a young activist and a medical student in the
Dagdoug is a 20 years old medical student at the Faculty of Medicine of Monastir. She is currently a member at Catalyst Association working on the enforcement of youth engagement in civil society and public life. She was a debater with the Tunisian organization, of debate, Young Humanitarian Voices, and she has participated in several competitions since 2018. She won the National Debate Forum. She won the National Debate Forum. She won the National Debate Forum 2020, organized by Young Humanitarian Voice in December 2021. She was the best national speaker in the Tunisian University Debating Champions, and she represented with her team, her university in the International University Debating Championship in Turkey, June 2022. And now she a debate coach working with the Tunisian Organization of Debate. She was a participant Safir program and a panelist during the Arab Forum for Sustainable Development 2022. She have also been interested in advocating on medical education as a founding member, and now the vice president of the Organization of Medical Students Odix at the Faculty of Medicine of Monastir. So welcome, Aya, and we will talk.
So we'll talk at length when we will be dealing with youth and future generations. Welcome. We will begin with Mrs. Gihan Abou Zeid, who will be talking about gender and the impact of climate change. I will begin with my question to you. How do climate change really intensify gender gap according to you as a human rights activist? Thank you very much. Thank you, Ahmad. Thank you for hosting me and allow me to share to take part in this webinar. Allow me to. We have 20 minutes and we have 3 questions. So perhaps 5 minutes. So at the onset, I would like to use the term climate justice versus gender justice. Why? The importance of the term climate justice, because climate justice means that the actual world we cannot deal with climate change in this world equally, but the impact of climate change differs radically between different groups of humans based on their geographical location, the nature of work, based on their income and salary, also based on whether you're living on the north or the south of the hemisphere. So the most poor, the most vulnerable people, their economy is based on agriculture, and climate change really impacts agriculture greatly through emissions, floods, drought. We will discuss that very quickly, but allow me to say that there are perhaps very vast factors that lead to inequality in climate justice, why the impact of environmental problems are not equal on everyone. There's certain reasons, for example, geographical differences, geographical location, for example, plays a role. The locations that are below seawater are affected by flood. For example, Syria has faced a drought crisis from 2007 to 2010 that led to internal migration or displacement that led to 1.5 million Syrians. These Syrians also have faced social problems, harsh social problems as a result of this internal migration. And internal migration, mainly the women are 80% of those who move as a result of climate crises or war crises, and this leads to a lot of social problems. We'll mention that. So geographical differences and geographical location is a main factor of climate inequality. The other factor is that a historical share in carbon emissions. This historical share is based on the fact that there are, for example, the richer countries of the world, and these are the countries, are industrial countries that use fossil fuel in order to manufacture, and these countries contribute in higher levels of carbon emissions than others, and these emissions impact us who live in less developed countries. Hence, of course, this indicates that development is not equal between countries as a result of economic and historical situation, and this reflects, of course, reflects in dealing with climate change differently. For example, there are countries from the north and the south that face major problems in managing coastal areas, and despite that, and floods is mainly coastal floods, floods in Bangladesh and Netherlands. There's a great difference in dealing with them. Holland or Netherlands have a greater capability to adapt. It is more resilient. And because, of course, the architectural skills and the financial skills, while the human loss, economic loss is 10 times more in Bangladesh, for example. And also regional and political relations plays a great role in our climate situation. According to the FAO, there are 8 countries that are near Arab countries that they control more than 85% of. Hence, there is a great opportunity to deal with water sources and use them as a weapon. And unfortunately, this happens. And we all know that Turkey has established many dams, and this affects greatly the agricultural community, especially in Iraq. Also, among the major factors is internal strifes and conflicts. We have Arab conflicts where internal conflicts and war on these Arab countries impact them and affect them, affect the infrastructure, affect the environmental and cultural infrastructure. And this also is reflected greatly on women, affects women greatly as well. And also we have a problem in the governance of resources. It is not only related to the scarcity of water, but the unequal distribution of agricultural products and the misuse of water resources. Also in Lebanon, for example, we have a major example. Lebanon is rich in water resources, and it has 35 Lebanon has a water problem, mainly according to experts. The reason is the mismanagement of the water resources. Also, the other factor that supports inequality and creates a major gap between countries and different human groups and between men and women is the imbalance of power relations. For example, major oil companies really leads to major gas emission as a result of CO2 and torch gas, CO2, and of course, the major oil companies and the multinational companies that work in oil and gas, of course, hide this information. A BBC report has shown the adverse impact on air as a result of emissions from these oil companies in Iraq. For example, the impact of climate change is very clear, whereby one of the UN experts has described it as being modern regions of sacrifice, where, for example, personal interests and economic interests comes at the expense of the interest of humanity, of human beings, especially women. Hence, there are many factors for inequality. Of course, we cannot disregard the effect of globalization on the world economy and how they are able to deal with climate change. We cannot, of course, disregard the colonization history of the country, especially North countries, and the looting of the resources. And this is what's happening, especially in Africa and some Arab countries, the looting of resources through occupation and through mass occupation recently. These factors are still affecting the economic imbalance and disruption and the support of corruption and support of corrupt authorities. Frankly, we know that you have a lot of information, a lot of knowledge. I can stop here in this part. Yes, perhaps the upcoming questions will tackle these issues. Among the things you have mentioned, always the countries of the South. We as Arab countries or MENA countries, we are the most affected and we are the least to affect climate change, actually. And this as a human duty and human rights duty from those who have high carbon emissions to bear the environmental debts of citizens and poor countries. Yesterday, I was reading in a report, and the figure was quite shocking. The developing countries produce 1/3 of the food of the world, and yet they are underfunded. This is a part of climate injustice, inequality that we can see among reports issued with shocking figures and statistics. I was very happy that the topic of women and water was tackled on the same day, on the 14th of November. This highlights the importance of the women component and the presence of women in the management of water resources. This is my point of view as a water expert. And now we move to the second question, through which we can perhaps open the floor for discussion. In your opinion, Mrs. Abou Zeid, does the current cultural frameworks against women affect women's resilience and adaptation to current and future climate change? Of course, I think this is a very important factor. Cultural framework, like economic and political framework, we can compare it to three main influences: the political, economic, and social influence. All together, they undermine the women's ability in dealing with the impact of climate change. Let's look, for example, at climate change, how it leads to an increase in the number of men who migrate abroad, especially in poor communities. I was in Sudan weeks ago, and there were vast villages, and this is the case in most of the poor countries in Africa and Asia. Work opportunities after climate change takes place outside of the villages. Hence, men leave and they migrate to search for livelihoods, and women take the responsibility of working and continuing work if they have any resource, and take and shoulder the responsibility of the household. So this is doubling the burden of women. Also, violence increases when resources are scarce. Hence, climate change really weaken economic resources, and here GBV, gender-based violence, increases, and social economic tension and political tension increases in vulnerable communities and environments. And there is no way in order to we have to remind, of course, with the increase of violence, when violence is linked to climate change, especially along with unequal government policies. Also, within the respect of cultures, all the problems of dealing with resources, water, energy in the framework of the household is based on culture and the social roles, and all of this on the shoulder of women. Hence, the water scarcity impacts mainly women, because the responsibility of bringing water is that of women. Hence, some research state that women spend 4 hours a day walking on foot and waiting in line to get water. And it's estimated that countries that, of course, face drought spend 50% of their time daily in burdens in providing resources for family, be it food, water, or energy. And truly, and also energy, or bringing energy, of course, drives girls to get out of school, and the inability of finding work, and the inability of developing work skills. And many studies also show that the girls in households that face a dire situation are either at risk of dropout from schools in order to help their women, for teenagers, for example, help their mother in their responsibilities, or they are affected by early marriage or at risk of early marriage and minor marriage. For example, in Morocco, a study prepared by the public solution in Morocco. The countries that were affected by the drought found in minor marriage or early marriage as a solution for financial problems. In Sudan, of course, during drought, young women are married, and some experts called that minor marriages during drought and during environmental crisis as a strategy to stay alive in order by getting rid of girls in order to alleviate the burden within the family. Also, we see there are burdens and health burdens and impacts, health impacts that are grave, whereby culture does not support education amongst girls. Hence, the marriage of girls during crisis is double, and this is what happens in Bangladesh. Women also, women do not learn survival skills. On the other hand, again, because of the cultural frameworks and norms, and because women are those who provide energy, especially in poor communities, women are those responsible of providing alternative energy sources that depend on coal, for example, wood, soy, corn. These resources, experts say that in the family's kitchen that depends on burning this material, the woman breathes daily approximately the equivalent of smoking 100 cigarettes. Hence, the WHO has mentioned that 4 million women die yearly from lung diseases, and those, of course, who burn traditional fuel. These statistics are not broadcasted, and they are indicated broadly that because women shoulder the responsibility of traditional alternative energy, that is a means that is causing their death more than others. On the other hand, we find that the lack of electricity is a source for the death of 1 woman per minute, according to WHO, because they are affected by, of course, by side effects during birth. Hence, there is a woman that dies at giving birth every minute because of the power cut. And is disrupted, an imbalance, and since the system is disrupted, all negative factors will affect women more. The cultural, environment, political system are all imbalanced, and there's imbalance of power relations. This is why the number are negatively impact in any risk. Since COP27 took place this year in beloved Egypt, were there a good participation of women in this conference of parties? And the COP, was the voice of women heard on the level of NGOs, CSOs, or were there any representation by women in government, for example? As I heard from a colleague of mine, who is participating in the COP, he said that the main protests and demonstrations were led by women, and this made me happy. Were there, for example, representation of Arab NGOs, Egyptian NGOs? Was women's representation fair and good? Truly, I'm not in Sharm el-Sheikh to answer the question, but I know that from friends that NGOs are represented, but the possibility is, for example, the freedom of speech, the discourse being used in COP. This is the question that should be asked. I don't know the answer, but we all know that perhaps situation is not favorable to answer, but we all have to ask about governance and the good management of resources, and about environment-related political decision. But allow me to answer what you have said, the participation of women. I want to ask a question in a different manner. In truth, is it only limited to the fact of having women representation, or the issue is to have a feministic approach in all the policies that are being discussed with all parties in COP27? The issue is in the feminism of discussion. The issue is to have a gender lens in all the discussions taking place in COP27. And of course, there are women leaders and leadership, feminist leadership, but we should have feminist leaders also talking using a feminist discourse. Hence, the feminism of discourse is important. From what I have seen online, the concentration was mainly, especially by international organizations, was on the use, for example, on the term projects and programs, but there was, of course, no talk about the major problems. There was no talk about the major interventions, some of which I've mentioned recently: the role of globalization, the role of multinationals, for example, the role of women, the role of power relations, the imbalanced power relations, and the role of and the hegemony and patriarchal, actually, hegemony. These terms were not mentioned at all, as I have seen. Hence, the structural crises that were not discussed, but there were discussions about the role of the private sector, the increasing women leadership, for example, increasing the voice or bolstering the voice of women, and all of that very good. But these are not structural solutions. Hence, we have to question here. Perhaps you can ask the question later on about civil society organizations. I believe as NGOs, as CSOs, we have to support feminism, and we have to request and to insist facing all forms of hegemony on women, hegemony on environment, hegemony on resources, and to have transparency in national governments, because the lack of transparency, the lack of access to information was going on in our lands, the level of emissions, contracts with multinationals. There should be demands now to have access to such information that will help us to participate and will help CSOs, civil society organizations, to place. And now we will give the floor to Aya Dagdoug. Welcome, Aya. How are you, Aya? Hope everything's well on your side. Thank you. I'm very happy to be with you. Welcome, Aya. By the way, we were one of the panelists of the Arab Forum for Sustainable Development, and I'm happy to be with you again. We will begin talking, Aya, about the youth and future generations in general. The major outcomes of COP27 negotiations, did they concentrate on youth and future generations, since there was a session dedicated for youth? And they met with UN Secretary General Guterres, and there was talk, demonstration, but as I heard, they did not participate in negotiations, only in the pavilion, in the side meetings, but not in the negotiations. As I've heard, the youth does not have expertise to negotiate, and they were not given the opportunity to be part of the negotiations, and who will represent future generations as well in these negotiations. So my first question to Aya: what is the role that youth and future generations should play in facing climate change, and how make sure that they partake and they participate in the current discussions and future discussions?
Okay, so I'll be speaking in English. I have I have prepared like a little presentation. So if can I share my screen?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Okay, so we'll be addressing a key point, which is the youth and future generations, and how can we ensure they are an active part in the climate action. So, as we all know, the world is home to 1.8 billion young people between the age of 10 to 24. It's the largest generation of youth in history. We always speak about the youth and the future generations as victims and as the most vulnerable group that is affected by the climate change and its impacts. But we often forget that this group of people is also a valuable contributor. So we need to speak of them as a partner in the fight. So what I'm going to present here is some of the points that I see youth can do, and some things that can be valuable in our fight against climate change. I'm sorry. Okay. So the first points that I want to talk about is the importance of empowering the young people and their education before that we speak about their role in the climate action. So we really need to empower these young because it represents for us a historic and collective opportunity so that we can achieve the goal that we want to get, and it is a sustainable future. It is a historic opportunity for us to build a peaceful and a sustainable world with this generation. So youth education represents one of the most effective tools to so that we can achieve this goal. So yeah, the point here is that we really need to focus on empowering and educating our youth and the next generations, and why not include the climate action and the climate change in the education that we get and the future generations get since primary school and then even high school and all. So after that, we can speak about the role and how to ensure they are here and they are speaking about climate action. For climate action, I think that the most important thing we need to focus on is raising awareness in their communities. Youth, even now, without the empowerment they need, they are taking a great part in raising awareness in their communities. So you can see that everywhere, all over the world, there are lots of initiatives taken by youth and taken by people who really are interested, and they are really engaged in climate action. So I guess one of the most important parts that youth can play a role in is raising awareness in their communities, as well as building a climate conscious society. As I said before, our ultimate goal is to have a world with a peaceful world, a sustainable world. And to achieve that, we really need to have a long process and to build a climate conscious society. They can help in promoting lifestyle changes and concrete solutions, as well as making their own lifestyles as low carbon lifestyles. If we concentrate on youth and future generations, we can make them make choices and career choices that are more and more better to our world. So here we can speak, for example, about the choice of their job. For example, we can speak about economy. They can be innovative, and they have and they can be like entrepreneurs, but and have a service or have a company which can give them the profit they want, but at the same time to give a green world and to contribute in changing the situation we are in. So we can also speak about advocating for the rights, whether it is their rights for a better world, a sustainable world, as well as advocating for the rights of the groups. As Mrs. Gihan had said, the climate change is affecting people disproportionately. So there are lots of groups that are considered as vulnerable in this situation. And I guess youth and the future generations, they have a great role to play in advocating for the rights of these people. As I said before, these young people and the youth, they are not only here as victims, they are contributors and they are innovators. They can be entrepreneurs, they can be the policy makers of tomorrow, so they can help in developing products and services and leading campaigns to build a green world. And I guess governments and investors must support this youth-led solution to climate change, so that we can help to develop and promote an innovative solution by young people. For the question of how to ensure they are a part of the dialogue, I think that it is a very simple thing that I'm going to say, which is simply to ensure they are part of the dialogue, give them a place in the dialogue. Just give the youth a place on the table. So as governments set and review national plans and develop policies that have climate implications, they must ensure that the young people are represented and involved in this process. The young voices must be included in the decisions, whether it is via consulting or surveys, or even by being present, for example, in conferences or in any meetings, whether it is local or international events happening or national events. So I think it's really important to give these young people a place at the table. If we want to ensure to have an effective response, youth perspectives and needs should be effectively integrated in the discussion and in the design and implementation of the national adaptation plans, as well as the nationally determined contributions, because as we said before, they are really valuable contributors and a large number of the people living today on Earth. So when we talk about 1.8 billion young men and women on this Earth, we're talking about a big number that needs to be included in the dialogue. So I hope the time is not up, or
Thank you, Aya. That's a really great job. It's a valuable presentation. ومن
the discussion that you have talked about and you have tackled as well, and we've already talked about whether in the Arab Youth Forum or sustainable development conferences and involving youth and drafting policies and involving the youth and drafting the new legislations, because it will affect them, it will affect our future and the future of our generations. However, is this what's being implemented on the ground? Are we really talking about a progressive plan from the government to integrate youth? Unfortunately, until now, we didn't see these measures taken. As to the issue of involving youth and the negotiations or in COP27, of course, the participation based on what I've received from the youth ambassador in the region and from my colleagues, they have focused on the subsessions and it doesn't include the negotiations because they do not have the experiences and the knowledge when it comes to climate change, and do not own the information on sustainable development. And who is the reason behind this? Yes, you're right. I totally agree with you. Yes. Why? These are the future generation. As Aya said, why they do not own the knowledge so that their participation will be active and real? Why they do not have this knowledge? Yes, and we totally agree with you and we reiterate this point. It was part of the program of Safir or the ambassador last year and this year, which is to talk about sustainable development goals and advocacy. And of course, many youth whom I know, whether from Jordan or the Arab region, among the countries who have participated, they worked on the 17 goals, on the climate action, and goal number 13. Before that, they didn't know anything about this because the educational background was different. However, what Aya has called to implement, whether is to have a knowledge whether at different educational levels, not only those who are working in the Ministry of Environment or Ministry of Water. No, this is a reality that will affect everyone and all categories of the society, men or women, youth or elderly, and the future generations. So yes, we urge and we call through these sessions in case there are negotiations for COP28 that will be organized in UAE, United Arab Emirates, not only to be represented, but to be represented in the negotiations. That means we need to start the rehabilitation of the youth as of now to be well qualified and to be able to advocate, to participate in the negotiation. And Ms. Gihan, if you want to say anything, the floor is yours. Yes, when it comes to the rehabilitation of the youth, as you have said, and the meeting that, or the COP28 in UAE next year, I said that we need to know who are these youth. Also, these youth, they need to represent different groups, the urban, the rural, even from different educational background, because the youth in the rural areas deal with the environment in a different way than the youth in the urban areas. Of course, I'm not talking about a limited number also. So this is why they need to be present and active because they are among the first victims. So the victims of the environmental changes and unfair and unjust policies, these are the victims of the youth and they need to be present. We won't accept that the youth only will be those who know how to speak languages and who are chic and who wear suits. No, we won't accept that. This will entrench more the discrimination. We need to have real justice and we need all the categories, as Mrs. Abizat has said, well represented. And now we have around 40 minutes or 35 minutes to open the floor for Q&A's, questions from the participants and the youth who are with us. So I'd like to open the floor in case you want to participate or to comment. You can raise the hand and then listen to the question. Dr. Abby. Thank you for this valuable webinar. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Kauthar Abbas from Tunisia. I live in South Africa. I'm an activist in the Democratic Women Institution, and also I'm an activist in South Africa and the Global Demonstration for Women. What you've talked about is very important. I just wanted to reinsure a very important part that Mrs. Gihan has already talked about. And in my opinion, there's something very important, which is the issue of the people who have causes to be well represented in the conferences and the local and international discussions. And as Mrs. Jahan said, this is something very important. Women, when we talk about the climate changes and when we talk about what we are suffering from as international community from COP27. However, we cannot deny that women who are in the local communities are the most affected group. It's not us or women who are sitting behind the desk facing this computer. No, and unfortunately, they're not at all represented in these discussions or in our societies, even in the narrow geographical location. If I want, I think you know the Women Democratic Institution. It's a very well-known organization in Tunisia. However, unfortunately, as I'm saying it here, and I'm responsible, we do not work on this category of women. We do not target them as we should be. And until now, we do not have a committee that work on ecology and work on climate change and its repercussion on women, and they do not study the level of damage. That doesn't mean we don't work with female farmers. Of course, it's part of our work. However, until now, we didn't delve into the core issue of this problem. So I had the golden opportunity when I left, since I've been living in South Africa for the past 17 years. And my work, I really appreciate that you have an idea about this issue and about the international movement. They work particularly on the local communities and on the grassroots. They focus on the grassroots and grassroots principles and the popular education and the popular research. That means everything related to the local communities and the minorities, such as the indigenous people and others. So this experience means or allowed me in particular to see closely what does it mean to have women in these occasions where we can share the experiences. To have a woman farmer and a woman, a fisherwoman, woman working in the fisheries, a woman working in the forestry and all the forest products. So yes, this is something unique. She's discovering that there are different approaches closer to the reality, more than the feminist approaches. Between parentheses, the academian feminism, or if you can say so, the approaches that wrote and document the experiences of women, and this is something else. So this is why I would like to reiterate this part and say that first, especially in our Arab region, and I'm lucky and I'm still really active with the Women Democratic Institution. I follow up with all the activities of the organization. I follow up on the internet. I work on committees, draft reports, and believe me when I say we didn't see progress in this regard, where especially when it comes to the ecology of feminism, the education also, which is the cornerstone, which is very important to communicate with women, the focal education, which is very important. So there are comprehensive strategies to communicate with them and to integrate them and to integrate them in the feminist movement, and especially the mechanism knowledge that they own, not that we own. So there are some of the huge concepts, comprehensive concepts that we as women in our organizations, as feminists in our organizations, we're not empowered when it comes to ecology, for example, the blue economy, colonialism, the global south, the global north, and the nexus between them, the responsive budget, and many other concepts that, personally speaking, and based on my experience, we are still lagging behind. We're still not well qualified to discuss them. How can we advocate or discuss and conduct the negotiations are we not well empowered, or there are categories, a huge category that is not well qualified to discuss these concepts, do not know about these concepts and their link with the climate. Mrs. Kassar, sorry for interrupting you, but we need to give the opportunity for the youth and to other participants. But of course, your intervention is another value. And this is what we've talked about, whether when it comes to women or the youth, we need to empower and we need to talk about this information so that it will be presented in the conferences at the national level. And now we'd like to ask another question from Maha Muhammad. How can you integrate a women, peace and security agenda, especially in the crisis and the link with the climate change? Can you open the floor for Mrs. Gihan Abou Zeid? So of course, the most affected were women, climate change, and others. So Mrs. Abou Zeid, if you can answer the question, please. Thank you for this question. I would like to go backward and ask about security. What does security mean? Security, in fact, when we talk about security, starts from protecting the people, the facilities, the buildings, the state from any attack or from any crime committed, or the human security. of course, there are issues related to human security, and they are interlinked with each other and interlinked with the protection. These are the political securities and the community security and the personal security and the economic security and the environmental security and the health security. So this is why when we talk about personal security and health security and environmental security and economic security, all of these link between the security related to wars and different crises. So this is why the relationship is really tight and close and interlinked, and it is the same related to the concepts of a human security. The framework that we work on the issue of women, peace and security and environment, the number one is that all the most affected groups, the most vulnerable groups, whether those affected from the war or others, number one, they need to be closer at different levels. As we have said, number one, it needs to be the participation. We need to raise our voices. They need to be active as well. And of course, they need to be active, really active. In order for them to be active, we need to share with them the information that will help them be well empowered and well qualified. Also, we need to have protection plans because I cannot ask a person to participate and to be involved and their lives are threatened. We need to have prevention. So we need to have prevention for the people who didn't fall yet. Prevention is really needed. And you have asked me, Ahmad, about what was discussed, whether in the day that we have talked about on gender or other days also. These are among the aspects that we didn't talk about. Prevention is very important. And while talking about the future, I think that if we're talking about any financial resources, part of these financial aspects need to focus on the plans of prevention. And this is why there are plans that are interlinked, as you have said, participation, protection, prevention, and also the rehabilitation for those who have lost their resources or lives, and all of these are interlinked with each other. And this is because of the war and conflicts and the climate disasters or challenges. So once again, it's related to all the points that are linked together, human security, which include the tight intervention between the wars and conflicts. Yes, I totally agree with you, Maha, in what you have talked about when it comes to the early warning policies. And this is what we need in our countries. And we didn't deal with it as we should, especially when it comes to the previous discussions. And we didn't deal with it at all when the discussion focused on gender issues. Yes, and this what will entrench what you have talked about, Mrs. Abou Zeid, based on my previous readings and in the 10th annual report about climate. There was a summary presented about the research conducted and the COP as well as shed the light on the damages and losses, saying that this is a necessity. Also, among the concepts that were discussed, more than 3 billion people will be in heated areas and zones. These are the areas that will be negatively affected from climate change by 2050, more than the status quo. And of course, the early warnings double of the affected current coastal areas will be affected. All of this needs to work on the issue of prevention, early warning, and clear policies and its implementation on the ground, as well as allocate the resources that will allow us to activate the early warning. In Iraq, in fact, we have the natural rivers, and in 2016 UNESCO has considered those rivers one of the historical heritage, and it is an environmental and touristic site. Of course, all of these rivers and springs have disappeared and they are threatened. The animals are being killed and die, and more than half of them are moving and mobile. And this was 6 years ago. Where are the environmental experts? Where are the plans in our Arab region that used to expect that this will happen in these few years? What will happen after 3 years and after 6 years? So this is why we need to ask ourselves the question, and this will be one of the tools of the community. Where are the early warning plans? And what is the nature of the indicators that we need to depend on in holding the governments accountable? This is something very important that we need to focus on. And of course, it was not elaborately discussed. Hopefully next. If there are no further questions, I'd like to ask Aya if she's still with us. Aya, there were certain questions or several questions from the Jordanian youth participating in COP, and they have asked these questions. I don't know if in Tunisia you had something similar. Were there certain messages from the youth in Tunisia in COP? On the COP? Anwar said we are racing with the time. Please fulfill your pledges for the sake of our future and the future of our children before it's too late. Also, our colleague said also on the spoken language, it's enough for you to choose your economic interest over our interest and the interest of our generations. You need to abide by the conventions that you have ratified. Were there any intervention from the Tunisian youth? They have any slogans or demands? Aya, since you are a youth activist from Tunisia. Thank you, Ahmad. In fact, I didn't have the knowledge. I do not have the knowledge if there were messages delivered from the Tunisian youth to the leaders who were in COP27. However, I believe that even if there were messages that were delivered and we didn't know about it, that means there is insufficient work that's being done. And the delegation that went from Tunisia was a governmental delegation with the Prime Minister, Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Environment. However, the youth were not fairly represented. So we didn't even reach a stage where the representation is like a decor. No, it was an official delegation. We're not talking about the people who attended personally or individually as audiences. However, the official delegation who went from Tunisia was ministerial or had positions, and there was no real involvement to the youth or the civil society, for example. Unfortunately, this what will happen in our countries. the delegations are only at the governmental level or the official level only. Hopefully the situation will be better and will be improved in the upcoming years, and hopefully we will meet in another meeting and another event where Ms. Abou Zeid, Ms. Dagdoug, hopefully we will meet you. So thank you for your participation and for your presence. Thank you. Your participation was an added value. Hopefully you have benefited. We'd like to thank Mrs. Gihan Abou Zeid also for her contribution. Hopefully we'll see you soon once again. And Mrs. Aya also, thank you. We would like also to thank the non-governmental organizations for hosting this webinar and organizing such an event. And thank you. Have a good day. Hopefully we will see you soon. Thank you for participation.